There are 3,923 provinces near EU4, which is more than Google tells you, but that is because I'm including the Lake and Sea-tile provinces. This is a complete tier list after all, and that means that of course provinces such as Province ID 1741, otherwise known as Southern Pacific 26, also have to be ranked, which does bring up the final province count for this tier list to 3,923. Now, previously I usually would budget around 1 to 2 minutes per item for the tier list videos when discussing them, but that would mean that this video would be anywhere between 65 hours long to 130 hours long. And well, turns out YouTube cuts videos longer than 12 hours and prevents them from being uploaded. Older videos do get around this restriction as this was introduced relatively recently, but yeah, I can't upload anything over 12 hours. Furthermore, you can probably tell by the length of the video, it's not quite 65 hours long. But before I get into what I have done for this tier list, and get further into everything, we have to get a couple things out of the way. See a like on the video would be appreciated, and a subscription would be amazing if you haven't already. However, I do have to say this video is brought to you by Raid Shadow Legends. And no, I'm not joking. The Raid Shadow Legends is coming at you today with a roster of over 800 champions. Wait, 800? Jesus, that's actually insane. It's almost twice the country count in EU4 worth of champions. To offer you thrilling PvP content. Wait, you believe me for talking about MP when no one cares? Well, don't worry, Raid has you covered with that PvE content too. To sweeten the deal even more, from the 21st of August, Raid is running the Asgard Divided event, which manages to provide thrilling Scandinavian gameplay without giving you a brain aneurysm. And unlike EU4, that makes you go through a 100-year mean time to fire event with 50 requirements just to pick up the North Face, you can grab the legendary champion Loki the Deceiver for free just by logging into Raid for 7 days, between now and October the 23rd. And that's not all. With the event coming with Thor, Odin and Freya? Friesland. There you go. You can pick them up by just playing the game. Now what I like most about Raid is their multi-platform support. No need to be stuck playing on just one device. Enjoy your Raid gaming, whether on PC or mobile. Most crucially, I got a link for you. Use that and start the game with some neat free stuff, as well as the epic champion Tagor, as well as Tyrell the moment you reach level 15. Anyway, grab it by scanning the QR code here. You all live through 2020. You should know how those work by now. But with that said, back to the province tier list. Right, so clearly I'm not going to be placing each province on the list manually. Two main problems. That is going to take 65 hours of my life at a minimum, and even assuming I upload it as a tier list part 1 to 13, hitting the YouTube 12-hour limit for 12 of those, I don't think that would be particularly entertaining, or frankly good. I mean, how many of you would honestly, outside of the meme, going to be watching part 9 of 13 of the province tier list? Oh wait, 17,000 of you watched me rank the loading screen tips, so frankly I'm pretty sure you guys would actually watch it at this point. With that said, the second problem is visuals. To see if I'm ranking buildings, I can use the images for the buildings. Ranking general traits, those have pictures too. Even something more abstract like ruler personalities, we normally have pictures for the modifier at least that I can use. Provinces don't exactly come with unique pictures, but the desire and demand for the tier list is still there. So how do we solve this problem? Pain and suffering. It's time to make the greatest spreadsheet for a lemon cake tier list known to man. I already make notes and sometimes even spreadsheets for my tier list, but this one is going to have to be the main course. Let's start with loading into EU4 and deciding what actually matters for a province. For categorization's sake, we will have one column be the province ID, and column 2 be the in-file, not in-game name of a province. So Paris is actually Ile-de-France in the game files, and hence that's what we'll be using. With that said, firstly, they need to be actual provinces. Sorry, lakes and sea tiles, but outside of existing, you don't have many unique features. As such, the first column that needs to be calculated is if a province is valid. So, does it contain actual land? Putting no for lake tiles and sea tiles, and yes for actual tiles. Next, I want to add 3 more columns for the 3 types of development, so base tax, base production, and base manpower. We can also later combine this for a total dev value, but for now we have to leave them separate. Now, another thing that provinces have is their trade good. Let's also add a trade good column, but some provinces have latent coal. So let's add a latent coal column too. That just checks if coal is present. Next, some provinces start the game with a fort, which I think should be represented, so another column for starting forts. Yes if present, no if not. After that, we need to consider if the provinces have estuaries, centers of trade, and finally great projects. What I'm missing conceptually is going to be the terrain of the province and any local modifiers like Bosphorus Straits and buffs like Diamond Mine of Golconda, since that is in a different format to estuaries and so on, so if you want to include them personally you can, but overall I don't think they're numerous enough or frankly important enough to affect the overall analysis, as this is going to be much more of a meta-analysis. And finally, the big boy, terrain. I will come back to terrain because terrain broke me. I have to leave it as an exercise to the reader. So let's take a look at the average province file. Say, take London, since it contains a bunch of stuff we're checking for like an estuary, centers of trade, and so on and so forth. Now for valid provinces, easy enough, even uncolonized provinces have development. So we can generate development first, and then for provinces that return no development, hence have null entries, we can backfill with yes or no values from that. And here we discover bug 1. So when I wrote the Python script for this, I would have the script open each file, locate the line starting with base underscore tax, production, etc., and take the value after the equals and X sign. So it was scoped to the 2 or 1 characters after the equals and space line. Find for, I would say, the vast majority of provinces, in fact, pretty much every province. But these files are also how the start date feature is implemented, so past 1707, for example, with London, its base tax and production is increased to 16. Issue is, my code would record the base production tax as 16, meaning I did go back and manually fix a bunch of these, but yeah, the issue is the line starts with the base tax here. My code was too stupid to account for the 1707 thing, and frankly, of course, all of those would be different. Hopefully this is resolved, but some may have slipped through the cracks. With that said, the trade good is quite simple. We just check the trade goods equals line and return the trade good listed there. And for latent coal, actually very simple too. The only latent trade good in vanilla is coal, so we just check each search file for any mention of coal, and if it's found, latent coal is checked. I really hope no words in the English language contain the 4-letter sequence C, O, A, and L, which is, well, not coal related, otherwise my code would break. However, if it did, I didn't discover it. Next, same thing for estuaries. I checked for the sequence estuary underscore modifier, and center of trade scope to the center of trade line, and returned NA if not found, or the value after the equal space sign is found. Fort underscore 15th is also what I scoped for to populate the fort line. And finally, the great projects, they are not listed in the province because Paradox hates me. They live in a great projects file segregated between buildable and not buildable, so I dropped a column called great project count and populated it with zeros, and then I had my code run through the 2 files, and for each great project, every time it found a province ID next to the start location, it would go to the spreadsheet, find the province ID in the row, and +1 the counter. Now, all of this was very easy to say, but it wasn't that easy to code. If you're a full-time developer, Science Wizard, and claims you can do this yourself in an hour, you're probably correct, and you're also welcome to do so. In fact, I have a challenge for you: terrain. See, EU4 generates terrain by taking the promise map mode, that's this, and shoves it on top of the terrain map mode, that's this, and takes the color inside to assign each province a terrain value. Then it goes to the terrain override.txt and manually overrides like a third of those provinces. I know because initially I populated the terrain column with the override file, hoping it would override like 99%, and I assumed I could fill in the rest manually, but alas no. Technically this is working with BMP files, which is something we as humanity have been doing for a while now. I mean, BMP files famously have no compression, it's just one nice long vector, that is the color of each pixel in a row. So they are also massive files, but the good news is because they're stored in that format, they're quite nice to, well, okay, relatively nice to work with from a coding point of view. If I had a couple more months and definitely a couple more raid sponsorships to work on this, what you would do is overload the terrain BMP file and the province BMP file. Then for each province, find the province ID associated with each color on the map. And for province ID, say 1, you would overlay the 2 BMPs. And everything that is province ID 1, you make FFF, so the average color is returned. And for every other province, you combine overlay with something like zeros to make it destructive. Then you have a BMP file of just the province, meaning you are using that to determine the terrain for the ID for the code and ignore the rest of the pixels. Needless to say, just because I know how to code it conceptually does not mean I'm doing that. I mean, if I did, we won't have any other Lemon content for 1.5 years, and frankly I'd prefer not to make this tier list my full-time job. Everything else, though, worked. And here is the final result: main.xlsx. I have already calculated the scores for each province, but I'm starting by sorting the sheet with valid province equals no. And to the surprise of no one, that made all the scores come up as NA. Another thing to mention is I also extracted the continent of each province, that's from a separate file, but this wasn't used to score, just for some neat data visualization stuff for later. So that said, let's take a look at the formula. Here's the spreadsheet sorted by no valid provinces initially to prevent spoilers, and this is how the total score value would be calculated. So first of all, we need to take a look at the development. Now, I'm assigning 1 point for the score for each point of development you have. So the first part of this formula is actually quite simple. We just take everything in the production, manpower, and tax, and just sum the thing, and that gives us our first points, the development of the province. So a 10 development province will have 10 base score. Next, we need to use the VLOOKUP function, because we need to look at the trade goods in question. Now, these trade goods I've made in sheet 2, and there they are, listed over here. Coal is missing, because turns out no province starts with a coal trade good day 1. Remarkable. For that, we have latent coal. Now, if only there was some kind of way to assign a value to the trade goods, if only someone had previously ranked them in a tier list. Oh, wait, that was me, so I just used that. However, I knew that I was going to get shouted at it again, and I already got shouted at it last time for not putting gold into S tier. This pains me, but I had to concede to the demands of the population, and put gold in S, and hence give it a ranking of 10. For how I've determined this, we have the bottom tier trade goods given 2, then the next tier given 3, the next tier above given 4, then 5 for the A tiers, and then 10 for your gold and cloves for being disproportionately amazing provinces. If you disagree with me, you're welcome to amend the values. But that's what I went with. And now another thing that I think is important to mention is, of course, the unknown trade good. See, The unknown trade good is what every single province that's uncolonized has, and I had to give it a value, so I decided to go with 3. It's relatively low because it tends to be a pretty terrible trade good, but the potential of something better makes it a 3 instead of a 2. Because my argument is that a lot of the time the trade good is going to be terrible, like fish or something. However, there's also a chance of it being good, so to account for that possibility, which doesn't happen frequently but can happen, I bumped it up to a ranking of 3 instead of a 2. Again, you're welcome to change the numbers yourself if you disagree with me. And conduct your own analysis. Again, I'm not claiming any kind of gospel truth on this one. A lot of these have to be arbitrary. With that said, we are using the VLOOKUP function to basically take a look in sheet 1. So in this case, the VLOOKUP will take a look at the trade good value, and then it would read the value next to it, and then add it to our calculation here with this plus. So for example, if the trade good here was cloves, it would add plus 10 on this section. That's what this function does. Next, we need to take a look at latent coal. If it's yes, give 10. If no, give 0. Finally, for starting forts, I decided to give it a value of 3, because forts aren't... I mean, if you really want a fort in a province, it's 200 ducats. The thing is, 200 ducats is a pretty penny, so... yeah, it's kind of a weird one, but I think 3 is a reasonable port, place to draw the line. Now, I tend to bully marketplaces and do other things like that for not being that useful. I mean, the way to go forward is, of course, just conquering your trade. But the way you conquer your trade is, of course, conquering the estuaries and centers of trade. So I may have overvalued estuaries here, but I'm actually going to be giving, if an estuary is present, a value of 8. And if an estuary is not present, I'll be giving it a 0. I messed around with this earlier, had anything from a value of 5 to 10, and I think 8 was a reasonable compromise. I could have done 7 as well. I think 10 was a bit disproportionately high, and 5 was a bit disproportionately low, because unlike centers of trade, you can't really upgrade estuaries, and I think that diminishes their value. For centers of trade, though, for, well, values of 3, we return 15. For values of 2, we return to 10. And for values of 1, we return 5 for the score. The other thing to bear in mind, and I think this is important, is that if an estuary and a central trade is present on the same province, that makes that province a trade, well, basically a trade god. So what I have here is a separate function. If K and J is yes, so a center of trade is present, then we add an extra 5 to the score. So we have both a center of trade and any value of great project. Then we add an extra 5. Finally, this is where the big one comes into great projects. Great projects are really weird to evaluate because obviously a bunch of them are useless and a bunch of them are insanely strong. Like Alhambra on its own does a lot of heavy lifting. I messed around with a bunch of numbers, but what I settled with is that for every present great project, I went with plus 25 score, so 25 developments worth. It's a lot, but great projects are really, really important and have significant game impact, so I think that's a reasonable thing to draw a line at. It also means that provinces that contain 2 great projects are disproportionately amazing because they're gaining 50 score, which is quite a lot in the setup, meaning it takes quite a while for non-great project provinces to catch up. Which makes sense though, great project provinces are pretty dominant. So this is the score calculations used for how I decided to actually score these. As you can see, terrain is missing, and yeah, again, that's an exercise to the reader. Terrain would obviously greatly improve this analysis, but I can't. So I can't do it, so I didn't. Right, I think enough talking. Let's do what you've been waiting for. Let's sort by highest score, so largest to highest, and we start on NAs. And let's go to our spreadsheet, and we're going to disable the no scores. And without further ado, the best province, according to the official 11 calculations, is Venice, with a score of 96, 2 great projects, a center of trade, and stupid amounts of starting development on an excellent trade good. Venice is the city of the world's desire, which is remarkable because Constantinople does actually come up 5th. Takes it quite a while, and at a score of 91, it is also quite well represented. Remarkably, in 4th place, we also have Nanjing, which has put in a very strong performance for Asia, which is also quite good because it doesn't have any centers of trade, and even though it does contain 2 great projects, it really just gets there because of its development and starting fort, which is the representation for Asia. But what I did not expect was this absolute beast from Africa, Cairo, which starts with quite a lot of development, cloth, a starting fort, and a very, very neat overall score of 92. Cairo, of course, gets even better when you shove clothes on it, meaning that Cairo too can become the city of the world's desire. But it's time to give a bone to the absolute Portugal enjoyers out there. Lisboa is the absolute beast over here with 6, 7, 3 development, but it has a fort, it has an estuary, it has a central trade, it has a great project. This overall massively overinflates Lisbon and just makes them dominate the rankings here. Second only to Venice, Lisbon truly is the second city of the world's desire. Not too many unusual things after that. We have Paris on Ile-de-France, we have Moscow, we have Holland, we have London. Really a lot of the expected things. But as we keep going down further, we start to see more interesting appearances. Chengdu, for example, Milan, even Cologne actually does quite well overall. Rome actually is quite a bit far down the list now, which you would have expected to be higher. But yeah, and after this, the drop-off becomes quite bad, and scores start dropping very, very quickly. If we just start scrolling down like a little bit, we're already to like the 18%, and we've barely gone down the list. And yeah, there's a massive population of really, really low scores when we look through the entire thing. With that said, this is all in a very unhuman readable format. There's a bunch of cool data analysis we can do with this. So let's go do some cool data analysis. Firstly, I actually wondered how many provinces are there per continent? And yeah, Europe is massively overrepresented, which I guess makes sense for something called Europa Universalis, but yeah. Poor Australia though, the land down under is really neglected, much like South America and Africa. Next, a box plot, looking at total score compared to trade good. I'm not going to explain box plots, feel free to give them a Google, but they're cool. And yeah, I mean, can you guys spot Venice and Constantinople? I'm assuming so. But here's the fun challenge for you. What is that fish province? Or if you think you're a real EU4 gamer, what's that wine province? Otherwise, I spent a healthy amount of time looking at this graph. This is also a good time to own up. I didn't make the graphs myself, I mainly just collected the data. I had a friend help me out with making those. This is the part where I would give him credit and show his Discord profile, but he told me not to do that, so I'm going to respect Bushy Boy's wishes. With that said, let's now look at dev by continent. And yeah, as expected, Europe has the highest average and highest percentiles. But Asia does very well, because of India, Southeast Asia, China, and Japan, frankly. Africa also did better than expected too. China really comes in with that outline massive W's with their 1444 megacities though. Finally, I think total dev and score would be pretty strongly correlated with this analysis, and while I could have loaded it into R and ran some LMs on it and get strict correlation values and do some F-statistic analysis to start removing things that have less impact on score and do a whole bunch of statistical analysis on this, frankly, that's probably too nerdy even for the average 11 viewer. Visually though, plotting development against score, we can see that for the most part it's pretty close, but I have to admit that this plot is a bit deceiving, because if there's multiple elements for a single plot, it just kind of gets shoved on top of each other, so you don't really see the density of the plots be so concentrated at the lower quadrants. I also think that the interesting ones in this plot are actually going to be the outliners. So, more fun trivia questions. Can you guess the 3 provinces with 16, 16, and 17 development that are all scored above 80? And can you guess the province with 26 development that managed to score so relatively badly? I mean, bear in mind, with 26 dev, its floor is 26 score. This is also where you never see anyone with a score below 5, as the minimum is 2 score from trade good, 3 score from development. So there is a lot of provinces in joint last. With that said, for the final tier list, the percentiles used are top 10% for E, top 50% for D, top 30% for C, top 20% for B, top 10% for A, and the top 1% get the coveted S rank. And here they are, sorted by continents in the familiar tier list columns. Now finally, regarding the spreadsheet itself, I'll be providing it to channel members supporting me at the GigaChat tier and above. You will need to access Discord too for the file download itself, where I'll be posting the file itself in a cool supporters special chat. There's of course other perks for you to enjoy. With that said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this more than I suffered making it, and before I leave you, go install Raid with the link. I'm no longer asking.